Welcome to Field Notes, the monthly podcast of modern steel construction, the monthly magazine of AISC. I'm your host, Jeff Weisenberger, Chief Editor of Modern Steel Construction. This month's guest is Larry Kruth, AISC's Vice President of Special Projects and previous Vice President of Engineering. He also spent 31 years with Douglas Steel Fabricating in Lansing, Michigan, where he eventually rose to the title of Vice President. He also just became an honorary member of AISC, which makes him only the 13th honorary member in the Institute's history. He was also a longtime volunteer for AISC. And speaking of being the 13th honorary member, we'll get to why that particular number is significant in a little bit. But first, I just wanted to say welcome, Larry. Thanks for taking the time to speak with me.
Thank you, Jeff.
Let's start from the beginning. Where are you from and where did you grow up?
Well, I generally tell people I'm from Pittsburgh. I grew up in Pittsburgh, but in reality, I grew up in a borough that was actually right on the border to the city of Pittsburgh. It's called Sharpsburg.
Okay.
And one thing that's significant about Sharpsburg that most people would not even think about such a small area, it was the birthplace of the H.J. Heinz Company.
Aha. Okay, very good. So yeah, you grew up near the birthplace of ketchup and other assorted sandwich toppings,
Yes.
and other products as well.
Yes. Well, pickles are what they were famous for. So.
Oh, that's true. Pickles. I always forget the pickles.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk maybe a little bit about Pittsburgh in a few, but what got you into the world of buildings in the first place? And, were there certain buildings or other structures that you remember from when you were younger that pushed you down the engineering path?
It's a really interesting story. When I was in the fourth grade,
mm-hmm.
They were building a new elementary school. And for some reason, my father and I were sitting in a parking lot across the street from where they were building it. And I remember turning to my father and asking him, how do they know what size beams to use in that building? And he said, that's what engineers know how to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, wow, I want to know how to do that. And, it's strange that an elementary school in fourth grade to make that decision and go that direction. Now, being in Pittsburgh, obviously, there were a lot of great steel buildings.
Right.
I remember vividly in the late 60s when the U.S. Steel Building went up, which is, A588 Core 10 steel when that
mm-hmm.
went up in Pittsburgh, and watching that go up, and what a phenomenal building that was at that time.
Sure. And, on top of that, like Pittsburgh, I mean, obviously, I think most people listening would know this. You have all of these like amazing bridges to look at as well. I mean, with a building, you would have to know that it's steel framed if you we're in our world, but anybody can see those yellow bridges, which is pretty cool.
Well, actually, Pittsburgh has more bridges than any other city in the world, which is amazing as well. So.
I knew it had a lot. I did not know it had more than any other city. That's pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. And you are, I have to say, in thinking about Pittsburgh, I was only there for the first time ever when we had NESCC there a few years ago. And you were one of the first people to describe to me that view coming through the tunnel. You can tell people the name of the tunnel because I forget. But when you come through the tunnel and then you see the city emerge before you, and it's pretty spectacular.
Yeah, it's the Fort Pitt Tunnel as you're coming from the airport, coming into the city of Pittsburgh. It's almost like an entrance to the city. As you come out of that tunnel, the city just opens up in front of you. And at night, it's a phenomenal view.
That's the thing. I came during the day and I had wished I had come at night, but I'll have to do that at some point. So did you grew up there in the Pittsburgh vicinity. Where did you end up going to school? Or college, I should say.
Well, I actually went to a branch campus of the University of Pittsburgh.
Okay.
And I went to the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown because they had a unique engineering program at that time. And it really, because at the time I was going to school, most engineering programs were training engineers to go into the space program, which was in the early 1970s at that time. So I was looking for something less theoretical, which is what the program at the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown was. And I ended up going there. And as it turned out, it was a very intense program. Pretty much every class I took my senior year was a grad level class in the normal, if you were going to the normal engineering program.
Okay. So were you, and I've always known you as being, with Douglas Steel, and that's where, when I first met you, you were working there, and it obviously you'd been there for a long time, 31 years. Yeah, just curious, was that right out of college, or did you get in the design world before that? Or just maybe tell me a little bit about your path to, and I guess also through Douglas Steel.
Okay, I'll try to keep this short.
Okay, no problem.
I went to work for a very small consulting engineering firm in Saga. Right after I got to school. There were only 10 people in the firm, only one other engineer other than me. And I sort of got a baptism by fire because the other engineer, after I was there about 6 months, had a heart attack.
Oh, gosh.
So immediately everybody in the company turned to me and said, "Oh, you can take over his workload." So I basically took over his workload, learned an awful lot, and stayed there until I got my engineering license. Then went to work for another consulting engineering firm in the city of Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
I was there for a couple years, went to work for Kaiser Engineers, which is no longer in existence under that title anymore in Pittsburgh. Was there for a couple years, and then they moved me to a nuclear power plant in Cincinnati to work on that for a couple years because the market had died down again. I was there for 9 months, and Kaiser got thrown off the job, and I had no job. And luckily, I ended up finding an ad in the Pittsburgh newspaper for a structural steel fabricator in Grand Ledge, Michigan, looking for a structural engineer. Went to work for them. Did not work out well. I was there 9 months, ended up after 9 months going to Douglas Steel. And I started as a project manager, rose through a number of different ranks, and ended up after 31 years retiring from Douglas Steel the end of 2015 as a part owner of the company.
Okay, that's amazing. That's quite the journey. So obviously you started in the consulting world and then fabrication. I mean, I love stories. Like I remember too, like my first job out of school. A lot of people younger than us don't understand the idea of finding a job in the paper. But yes. Early in those days, either with Douglas or the previous company, what can you tell me? Was there something that you learned on early in the fabrication shop that surprised you? I mean, because you came into it as an engineer, but I'm just curious if there's, like one of those really kind of like early wow kind of moments.
I don't know. I would have to say, especially at Douglas Steel, I think I got a good education there. Able to walk out into the shop since we were a fabricator and an erector, got to walk into the field, be able to see how things actually went together and things worked, being able to understand the effort that went into fabricate steel, the problems that you may have with projects, with design documents, trying to make them so they're buildable, make sure that the end result is that no matter how tough the job is, the end result is the owner walks away smiling. And that's what you want to do at the end of the job, is make sure that happens.
That's great. It's a really good way of putting it. So speaking of beating your head against the wall, were there any, could you point to any projects from your your days with Douglas Steel in particular that stand out, either because of how proud you were of them, or how happy they made the owner, or just, how crazy they drove you?
Well, I think the one I want to point out, which is probably was a cover story from Modern Steel, which was the Accident Fund World Headquarters in downtown Lansing. Now, the Accident Fund World Headquarters was actually a 1930s era power plant that had sat abandoned for 25 years, right in the center of downtown Lansing, right on the river, a beautiful location, not a good place for a power plant. But Accident Fund, which is an insurance company, decided that they wanted to turn that into their world headquarters. So we had the job of preserving a National Historic Landmark, which was the building, and figure out some way to turn it into a Class A office building without disturbing the outside of the building. And you can maybe refer to that article. I don't remember what year it was or what happened. What it probably was. It's well over 10 years ago. No, I know that. It's
right about then, yeah.
Yeah, but the article is in Modern Steel, and it'd be good to reference it at some point.
Absolutely.
And it actually can read about it. It was a phenomenal job because we had to figure out a unique way of being able to erect steel in the building without being able to see where we were putting up steel, how to fit steel into an existing building, conserve as much of the existing structure as possible to use, but still make it a Class A office building with a lot of exposed industrial steel on the inside of it from the 1930s. So it was a challenging job. It really ended up being almost a full 3-year job to get it accomplished. And a lot of work we did on it was, an engineer was on it, and we did for the first probably about 18 months. The engineer worked hands in hand with us. In the last 18 months on the job, we probably did our own design work to try to help make things work.
Sure. I know that job well, and while you were talking, I did look it up. And so for anybody who wants to read about that one, it was in the December 2010 issue. The article is called An Inside Job. And I know we've referenced it here and there from a sustainability standpoint, but that I think is probably the most comprehensive write-up on the project. And yeah, when I was in Lansing back around that time, or maybe a little bit after, I remember driving by. Yeah, it is a stunning project. It's pretty. It's nice to look at from the outside, at least. I didn't get to go inside, but yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, I think I even saw you give a presentation on that one at NASCC at one point.
Yeah, I think it was right after we completed it. I gave a presentation on it. We actually got an IDEAS2 presidential.
Mm-hmm.
It was a phenomenal project to work on. It had all kind of challenges. Every day you were beating your head up against the wall, but everybody who worked on it said, we will never do another project like this again. It was such a phenomenal job. Think about it. It's an abandoned 25-year-old building.
Right.
Able to bring back to life because it was steel framed.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, you can't do that with other systems. No, that was, yeah, it was a really great story. It's still one of my favorite ones. As far as, building stories. So, I've always known you as a safety expert, and you've always helped keep modern steel construction out of trouble in terms of, eliminating photos that might show some sort of safety violation. I was just curious how you developed your focus on safety in construction and fabrication, how you became known as the safety guy.
When I was at Douglas Steel, and I was in charge of the engineering department, and the person field measuring and also safety was retiring.
Okay.
So I was approached and saying, since field measuring is really part of engineering, can you take this over? And I had an employee who could do that. So I said, yeah, I can do that. They said, well, can you take over safety as well? And I said, okay, I'll do that. And I figured I had to learn it. Mm-hmm. So what was my first job? It was I sat down and read all the Michigan OSHA standards, all of them on both general industry, which was the shop, and construction, which was the field, erection. And I read them and made sure I understood what they were saying. And after that, taking time to look at what we were doing in our shop, mm-hmm. taking time to see what we were doing in the field, finding some potential problems, working with those people to work on it, I sat down and spent time educating, lots of time educating our employees, mm-hmm. showing them what to do. And as that happened, I also became active on a lot of industry advisory committees for Michigan OSHA, helping them develop their regulations and helping them to refine them so they reflected what really needed to be done in industry. Mm-hmm. So how did I get involved? It was sort of because out of necessity, somebody had to do it.
Right.
And I took it on, like I take other tasks on, learned it, even though I knew nothing about it, mm-hmm. and sort of became a person that could walk into a fabrication shop, walk into pretty much any industrial facility, and be able to actually zero in on safety violations right away. It's amazing. I don't know how I do it, but I've actually walked through other facilities, even walked through Douglas Steel shop, and people would say, "How did you ever see that?" I don't know, but it just jumped right out at me. It got corrected, and it was done and over with.
Right.
But we just made it a point to be an extremely safe company, And that's how I became a safety person and safety expert. And by the same token, I knew what to look at in photographs in modern steel to help make sure that AISC didn't get into trouble.
Sure. Well, no, that's interesting. It's. I mean, no, I wouldn't say funny, but interesting how you when you stepped into a different role at your old company was because somebody had a heart attack, which is unfortunate, of course. But in this case, it's like once again somebody was retiring, and you were able to come in and step in and do something new, which is impressive, and it's a really good example of lifelong learning. And it's also funny when you mentioned how you can kind of walk in and notice something. I remember it reminds me of like whenever I'd buy a car, somebody would say, when you don't know what kind of car you want, as soon as you start doing the research and you figure out what kind of car you want, all of a sudden, whenever you're driving, you will notice that car because you weren't thinking about it before. But then when you start thinking about it, it just creeps into your consciousness whether you want it to or not. So that's impressive. But on that note, what made you want to come work for AISC?
Well, it's interesting too because first of all, we talked about how long I've been a volunteer. I was an active volunteer on many different committees. Mm-hmm. By the way, the first thing I ever remember volunteering and being involved with AISC is there's a publication, The Construction Management of Steel Construction. Mm-hmm. And it's actually for a free download on AISC's website. Mm-hmm. I was approached because the author of that was from Michigan State University. And I was approached to ask to be on a review team for that publication. And I was on the review team for that publication, which I can't remember how many years ago it was, but it was a long, long time ago. And that was the first thing I got involved with. And things started to grow from there. The funny thing is, I think the next thing I got involved with was the safety task force for AISC. Got involved with dealing with safety because of my safety work I had done at Douglas Steel. Mm-hmm. And as people got to know me at AISC, they started to tap my shoulder, say, how would you like to be on this technical committee? Mm-hmm. How would you like to be on this committee? How would you like to be on that committee? And pretty soon I was a volunteer on all these committees. And then when I retired from Douglas Steel the end of 2015, mm-hmm. I suddenly only had my volunteer work at AIC to do and nothing else, and got extremely bored. I mean, I was teaching at Michigan State University, doing a little bit of consulting work. Mm-hmm. Summer of 16, got really bored, and it wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I needed to find something to do. Mm-hmm. Because I was going for walks in the middle of the day, and I would come home from a walk in the middle of the day and tell my wife, I said, I'm going for walks in the middle of the day. That's what old people do. I need to find something to do. And she just turned to me and said, yes, you need to find something to do. So when that happened, I was still on the board of directors for AIC at that point in time. Mm-hmm. It's my last board meeting I went to. Charlie Carter just was appointed president of AIC. And Charlie sat down with me because my job on the board of directors was oversight of engineering and research. Mm-hmm. And he asked me for recommendations about who might be able to take this place. Mm-hmm. So we kicked a number of different names around. And without belaboring the point, one thing led to another. And as Charlie was in a taxi on his way back to the airport from the board meeting, I called him and said, Charlie, what about me? And he said, I never thought you'd be interested. And a week later, I had the job.
That's great.
Mainly for boredom. Because of boredom, I needed something to do.
Sure. But no, it's good. It's good that you had that conversation and that you made that call. Well, that's excellent. So, speaking of AISC activities and then, working here full time and then being on various committees and as a volunteer, you've also, as we mentioned, recently became an honorary member of AISC. First of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
And and second of all, it's a pretty small elite group. As we said, you had mentioned there were only a dozen before, so you're number 13. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's interesting the number 13, and because in my whole life, 13 has been a lucky number for me.
Mm-hmm.
And you might say, why is it a lucky number? Well, I was born on Friday the 13th. And because I was born on Friday the 13th, it's always been good things that always seem to come my way with the 13. So it's always been one of those things I've always looked forward to. And it just sort of was unique how this all worked out. They're saying, oh, I was appointed by the board of directors, by the way, as an honorary member of AISC. And being appointed honorary member, looking at the list of honorary members, there were 12 before me. Mm-hmm. And I'm the 13th. The last one that was given was in 2005. Mm-hmm. So they're not given very often, obviously, these honorary members. So it sort of is a great honor to be appointed as an honorary member, and being number 13 is even more significant for me.
That's just the icing on the cake. Wow.
Yes.
No, that's interesting. Friday the 13th is universally seen as an unlucky number and day, but for you, it's the opposite. That's funny. So I want to get a little away just for the last few questions. Get away from work-related, AISC-related stuff, and just talk a little bit about interests and such. We talked about Pittsburgh for a little bit, and we talked about the bridges and the buildings, of course. But I'm curious. You haven't lived there in a while, but do you have any particularly fond memories or favorite things or little known facts that people should know about Pittsburgh?
Well, it's the only thing I can really tell you, when I worked in downtown Pittsburgh, I used to walk around at lunchtime, around the city, and studied enough history to realize there are tremendous amount of history took place in the city of Pittsburgh, and people walk by every day and don't realize the buildings they're walking by. Mm-hmm. Don't realize what took place, where they are. That always amazed me. In fact, what was interesting is a few years ago, there was an NSBA collaboration meeting that we had at Station Square in Pittsburgh. And what's interesting about Station Square, all along the river at Station Square, is a lot of old steelmaking equipment, including a Bessemer furnace that's sitting there. Okay. So people can see that. I took one of our bridge market development people and actually walked through the city of Pittsburgh and gave him a tour of the city, walked down the streets, showed him what took place where, walked across the bridges, introduced him to all the bridges in the city. It was a very long walk that day before, but it was a real significant thing to walk him through and made him realize what took place in that city. Walking down to the point, seeing the blockhouse where Fort Pitt was during the Revolutionary War, and the blockhouse is still there, showing him the outline of the fort, showing the significance of the three rivers coming together, the Monongahela and the Allegheny forming the Ohio. And I always considered it as being a native Pittsburgher, because anybody who traveled out west always came across the mountains, the Allegheny Mountains, the Appalachian Mountains, came into the city of Pittsburgh, got down to the point, loaded their stuff on the barge, got on the Ohio River, and went and got on and so they could start their track at St. Louis to go out west. So even though St. Louis says they're the gateway to the west, they really started in Pittsburgh first before they got there. So.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that. Pittsburgh, the real gateway to the West.
The St. Louis people would not be happy that I said that.
Of course, but no, it's like, right. They both have a claim of sorts. So, I have to ask: do you have an opinion on Primanti Brothers, the sandwich?
Actually, the funny thing is, while I was there, it still was not a trendy place. It was a place that was in the Strip District in Pittsburgh, which most people don't understand what the Strip District was. Mm-hmm. The Strip District was a strip of warehouses. They were all along the Allegheny River, and all the stores, all the retail stores had picked up all their stuff from those warehouses all along there. Primanti Brothers was established there as a place for the truckers who would come in at night to unload their stuff so they could drive their truck and eat their sandwich, which was obviously, French fries, coleslaw, corned beef, everything on one sandwich. They put it in one hand and eat it while they were driving.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it was developed. When I was there, that was what Permitting Brothers was. It was not trendy like it is now. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. After I left, it became the trendy area, and the Strip District all changed and is now a trendy area, contrary to what it was when I was there.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I like that history on it. Yeah, that's the history of the Strip District and in the sandwich itself. Sure, that's good to know. Okay, so I've always known you, and I'm going to say I've always been told you have to say Trekker, not Trekkie, but I've always known you as a Trekker, someone who has a significant interest in Star Trek, particularly the original series. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, obviously I grew up with it. I mean, you have to remember I was, space program was such a big thing all the while I was growing up, and it was just amazing how it all came to be. And if you look at where it started, and at the time when Star Trek came out, we were making such great progress in space travel at that time. We really thought Star Trek could be a reality in probably about, by 1990. I thought it would be a reality.
Right.
Well, if you ever look at the progress we made from the first Mercury flight, which was, early 1960s, to landing on the moon in 1969, that's, we're talking about less than 10 years being able to do that. That's why in everybody's mind, that's what everybody thought where we would be at that point in time. Now, in reality, it's a whole long story about how Star Trek came into being and what was hidden there. But if you actually look at the original series and look at it and forget that it's a space show, you will find there were topical things that took place in all those episodes that were happening in the United States in the 1960s. There were racial issues. There were war issues. There was all kind of things that were taking place in our environment that were hidden in that series. And if you look at it from that standpoint, you will see there's more to it than a space program. It is really about relationships. And how people deal with issues and how we can overcome problems. So there's all kinds of real interesting stories buried in the disguise of a space program, if you look at it from that standpoint.
Sure. That's a very good take on it. And I think that's one thing a lot of people don't necessarily realize. But yeah, in a lot of ways, it was not a sitcom necessarily, although it did have humorous elements, but like a drama series that just happened to have the Starship Enterprise as the backdrop instead of a living room. Yeah. No, that's fantastic. And you do have how many times over the years have you worn a Star Trek outfit for Halloween?
Believe it or not, once.
That's it?
At AISC.
Yeah. No, that's good. I mean, sure. Yeah, I guess, if you pull it out every year, it's not quite as special.
No, that's the only time I ever wore it is, it was, I can't remember what year it was, but we had asked to do a department. See, I have departments sort of dress up for Halloween. And I suggested that we all dress up as members of the original series.
Sure. Now,
I had to go through and tell, okay, you are part of, obviously, I dressed as in the Captain Kirk gold color because that's the command color. Then I had to deal with the people that were science staff, and the science staff might be like people like education, and they had to wear blue. Surprisingly enough, engineering staff wears red.
Right.
And red shirts were always not a good thing to have on when you were in the original series, but the engineering staff all wore red. So if you actually, which I'm sure you do, Jeff, have that photograph, you can actually see that everybody is dressed in the appropriate colors for the position they had at AISC in the engineering and research department.
So I understand you're going to be retiring at some point, perhaps in the next year or so. I don't know if that's you can fill us in on the time frame, but I was just curious if you had any specific plans, if you had any bucket list items or hobbies that you're planning to take up or get back to that you haven't had time for in recent years, or if you're going to go out and walk around for a while until you get bored and then find something else to do.
Well, first of all, I'm retiring the end of 2022.
Okay.
So that'll be my official second retirement date.
Sure.
When I retired the first time in 2015, I established a consulting firm, Kruth Engineering, so I could do consulting work. And I actually was teaching at Michigan State and doing a little bit of consulting work. And I think probably what I'm going to do is reactivate that and see if I can do any consulting work to help any people out. Anyway, I might be able to help them. That's probably the only thing I really plan on trying to fill my time with. Hopefully I'm more prepared this time for retirement than I was the first time, because I'll try to find something to do. Now, what I am doing as well, all the committees that I was a volunteer with at AISC before I became an employee, I've reactivated my membership in all those committees, plus a few other ones. The stainless steel committee was not in existence when I was a volunteer before. I am now a member of that committee as well. So I will be working on all those committees, working the same as I did before as a volunteer, trying to fill my time with that. I don't really have any real plans other than that. Obviously, I have planned for another trip to Hawaii in February, just so I can take some time to just relax again.
Sure. That's what it's all about. Hawaii is, that's a great idea, especially when you live in the Midwest and it's February.
Yes.
That wraps up another edition of Modern Steel Construction's Field Notes podcast. Again, our guest this time around has been Larry Kruth, AISC's Vice President of Special Projects, and I'm your host, Jeff Weisenberger. Thanks for listening, everyone.